Aretha Franklin was the queen of soul, and her talents knew few limits. No matter what life threw at her, she stayed strong and never apologized. This is the heartbreaking true story of Aretha Franklin. Born in Memphis, Tennessee on March 25, 1942, to Barbara Siggers and Reverend C.L. Franklin, Aretha Louise Franklin and her family moved to Buffalo, New York briefly before settling down in Detroit, Michigan. Her father had become a Baptist circuit preacher by the age of 18, and in Detroit, he worked as a minister at New Bethel Baptist Church. Franklin's family in Detroit initially consisted of her parents, 2 sisters, a brother, and a half-brother on her mother's side. But after just a few years in Detroit, Siggers ended her relationship with Franklin's father and moved back to Buffalo. Despite the breakup of her parents' marriage, Franklin continued to see her mother during the summers, and Siggers often visited the children in Detroit. However, even though Franklin expressed an interest in living with her mother, her father made it clear that that wasn't an option. Tragically, in 1952, Siggers died of a heart attack when Franklin was just 10 years old. Both of Aretha Franklin's parents were talented gospel singers, and Franklin's mother was also a skilled pianist. Her parents' devotion to music gave Franklin an early entrance into the world of gospel singing, and due to her father's role in the church, Franklin joined the choir when she was just a toddler. According to Rolling Stone, Aretha, along with her 2 sisters, Irma and Carolyn, had significant musical talents. However, when a piano teacher was hired for Franklin, she hid from the teacher. Later in her life, Franklin would write, "Learning how to play by ear allowed me to develop a rather personal and signature style, which I treasure and would not give up for anything or anyone."
I didn't study, I play by ear, I don't read music at all.
Reverend C.L. Franklin also exposed his daughter to a variety of music figures, including Smokey Robinson, Clara Ward, and Sam Cooke. In David Ritz's biography on Franklin, titled Respect, Smokey Robinson recalls meeting Aretha as a young child. When Aretha sat down, even as a 7-year-old, she started playing chords. Big chords. All I could do was view Aretha as a wonder child. In 1956, at the age of 14, Aretha Franklin released Songs of Faith, Aretha Gospel, her very first album. At the same time, Franklin already had a 2-year-old child, Clarence, and in January 1957, she had her second child, Edward. Although she had to drop out of school, Franklin maintains that her family supported her in every way, encouraging her to pursue her musical career. Her sister Irma and her grandmother Rachel helped with raising the children while Franklin was working. And as her father started a gospel caravan, which soon became widely successful, Franklin began touring the country with her father, in addition to singing solos in New Bethel. At one point, Aretha Franklin was introduced to Phil Moore, an arranger and jazz pianist. After playing just a handful of songs, Moore turned to Franklin's father and said, "Aretha does not require my services. Her style has already been developed. Her style is in place. It is a unique style that, in my professional opinion, requires no alteration." Emboldened by this, Franklin's father decided that they should try to get Franklin a spot with Columbia Records, and the meeting with producer John Hammond didn't take long. He signed her immediately, declaring that Franklin was, quote, "an untutored genius," and the best voice he heard since Billie Holiday. Franklin signed on to a 6-year contract, during which time she recorded 10 different albums. Her first album with Columbia Records, Aretha with the Ray Bryant Combo, came out when Franklin was 18 years old. When Aretha Franklin was 18, she met 29-year-old Theodore Ted White, and by the next year, they were married. They had a child together, and White also worked as Franklin's manager. But White sometimes ended up doing more harm than good to Franklin's work. One incident occurred in August 1967. Franklin was supposed to perform as the headliner for the SCLC at the Atlanta Hyatt Regency, but was banned from the hotel only a week earlier after she and Ted got into a physical altercation. Undeterred, Franklin snuck in and ended up singing for 2 hours. Although the only people who know the exact details of their relationship are Franklin and White, there is significant evidence to support the idea that he was abusive towards her, including the incident at the Atlanta Hyatt. And according to Jet, when Franklin and White were already divorced in 1970, White was investigated for shooting Charles Cooke, Sam Cooke's brother, who was a guest at Franklin's home, in the groin. Despite making numerous albums with Columbia Records, Franklin felt as if none of the records she recorded reflected her true self. So when her contract with Columbia expired, Franklin linked up with producer Jerry Wexler and signed with Atlantic Records in 1966. However, working with Atlantic Records had a rough start. According to Song Facts, I Never Loved a Man the Way I Love You is the only song Franklin recorded in Muscle Shoals, Alabama at the Fame Studios. However, the recording session had to be cut short when her husband Ted White got into a fight with the trumpet player. There are various accounts as to what happened. According to Rolling Stone, White claimed that the trumpeter was using, quote, racist terms. David Hood, who was playing trombone during the incident, claimed that the trumpet player was making remarks to Aretha that were, quote, cool and hip and all that. As detailed in the Rolling Stone piece, Franklin and White were put off by the trumpet player's familiarity. Some in the studio, White included, had been drinking during the session, and the confrontation escalated into a fistfight. Later that night, White also got into a fistfight with producer Rick Hall, who had tried to mediate the situation. Franklin disappeared after that night, but 1 month later she arrived in New York City ready to finish recording. The Muscle Shoals musicians traveled up to record with her. Franklin would repeat the same process for her next 3 albums, with the band members traveling up from Alabama each time to play with her.
So absolutely, it was a milestone and the turning point in my career.
On February 14, 1967, Aretha Franklin recorded Respect, which dwarfed Otis Redding's version almost overnight. According to Rolling Stone, Franklin recreated the song from a plea into a demand. In remarking on the song's impact, the publication had this to say: in Franklin's voice, Respect was no longer a man's petition. It was something of a threat that switched gender tables. It was something wholly new. When Wexler played the new version for Redding, he said, I just lost my song. Respect was released during the long, hot summer of 1967, when protests against racial inequality swept across the United States. Although Franklin has said that she didn't sing the song with politics in mind, she was moved when it naturally became, quote, a battle cry and anthem for a nation. On June 28, 1968, Aretha Franklin was featured on the cover of Time magazine with the tagline, The Sound of Soul, becoming only the second black woman to be on the cover of the publication. However, according to Rolling Stone, Franklin was less than pleased with the inside article's representation of her. Although the piece recognized her talent, Franklin didn't like how it focused on her personal life and marriage. Despite this, Franklin pushed ahead, and many consider her time at Atlantic from 1967 to 1972 to be her golden era. During this time, Franklin was also battling alcoholism, but she continued to record numerous hits. By the end of the 1970s, Franklin had won 10 Grammys. Aretha Franklin was surrounded by activism from a very young age and was always a very socially conscious artist. She toured with Martin Luther King Jr. and along with Harry Belafonte, doing concerts and fundraisers for Reverend Jesse Jackson. And in 1970, she even offered to pay Angela Davis's bail after she was arrested for her supposed involvement in a courtroom shootout. Franklin stated that she would pay for Davis's bail whether the amount was $100,000 or $250,000. In a 1970 interview with Jet, Franklin explained why she wanted to help Davis's cause. I'm going to see her free if there is any justice in our courts, not because I believe in communism, but because she's a black woman and she wants freedom for black people. I have the money, I got it from black people, and I want to use it in ways that will help our people. During the 1970s, Aretha Franklin also started experiencing severe spells of depression. At one point, it got so bad that her family felt like they had no choice but to take her to the hospital. But Franklin wasn't happy when the media got wind of this incident, and she ended up pressuring Jet magazine to run an article that would portray her positively. According to Jet, Franklin held a press conference where she claimed that her hospitalization was caused by acute physical exhaustion due to her heavy schedule. However, Atlantic's Jerry Wexler claimed in Vanity Fair that Franklin frequently experienced depressive fogs that left her unable to do anything unless she really had to. Wexler told Vanity Fair, I remember going to sit with her at the Drake Hotel and holding her hand and begging her to come to the studio because we had a room full of musicians. And finally she came in and did it. Once you were there, it was beautiful. In 1980, Aretha Franklin signed with Arista Records and ended up staying with them for 27 years. There, she recorded Jump to It, which became her first top 40 hit in years. Franklin recorded numerous more hits during the 1980s, And in 1987, her album One Lord, One Faith, One Baptism won the Grammy for Best Soul Gospel Performance. That same year, Franklin made history by becoming the very first woman to be inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. During her entire career, Franklin recorded 58 albums and released 17 top 10 singles, the latter being more than any other female singer in pop history. Franklin also won 18 Grammys as well as 3 special Grammy Awards. It was also during this period that Franklin developed a serious fear of flying. During a trip from Atlanta to Detroit, the flight experienced such severe turbulence that Franklin never flew again.
I'm flying down the highway in my custom bus, okay?
Aretha Franklin remained a force to be reckoned with as the 20th century drew to a close. In addition to writing her autobiography, Aretha, From These Roots, she performed at President Bill Clinton's inaugural gala in 1993. 10 years later, President George W. Bush awarded her the Presidential Medal of Freedom. However, during the last decade of her life, Franklin suffered from health problems that were later revealed to be caused by pancreatic cancer. She also struggled against society's obsession with weight, and during her illness there was frequent speculation on her weight loss, which she said fluctuated due to her medication. But despite her failing health, Franklin was competitive and creative to the end. According to Rolling Stone, Aretha was always listening to the radio and wanting to know what the kids were listening to, who was on the rise and who was on the decline. It kept her going. Although Franklin kept scheduling performances, they often ended up being called off. And in 2017, she announced that she was going to be retiring from touring, although she intended to keep recording. Her final performance was on November 7th, 2017. On August 16th, 2018, Franklin passed away from advanced pancreatic cancer, but her legacy will live on forever. If you or someone you know is struggling with domestic abuse, please call or chat online with the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-799-7233.